The scent of honeysuckle always brings me back. Back to Maryland, to the streets canopied in emerald leaves, where sunlight dappled through the branches and painted shifting mosaics on the long, quiet rows of houses. It was a peaceful place, they said. And it was. It was the world I knew, the only one that truly felt like home. My home was a small, simple house, filled not with grand things, but something far more precious: love. At least that's how I remember it. Or perhaps that's how I choose to remember it. My mother, Eleanor, was the heart of that home. Her laughter was like sunlight itself, warming every corner of the house, chasing away any shadows that dared to creep in. I can still see her, even now, in the soft morning light of our kitchen, a gentle silhouette against the window as she prepared breakfast. The aroma of cinnamon and frying bacon would drift through the house, a daily invitation to start the day, wrapped in her warmth. Her smile, oh, her smile. It was a constant companion, from those early mornings until the fading twilight of evening, always directed at me, a silent promise of unwavering affection. She moved with a quiet grace in that small kitchen she adored, humming softly to herself, her hands knowing exactly where everything was, creating meals that were simple, yet tasted like love itself. My father, Thomas, was a different kind of presence. A man of few words, as people often described him, but his actions spoke volumes. He was the sturdy oak tree that sheltered our little house, silent and strong, always working tirelessly to provide for us. He wasn't one for grand gestures or effusive praise, but his responsibility was his love language. Every creak of the floorboards in the morning, every sound of his car pulling into the driveway at dusk, were assurances of his dedication, his quiet devotion to our family. He would sit at the dinner table after a long day, listening intently to my mother's cheerful chatter and my youthful stories, his gaze occasionally softening as he looked at us, a subtle, almost hidden tenderness in his eyes. Our house wasn't large or fancy. It was a two-story colonial, painted a faded yellow, nestled amongst similar homes, each with their meticulously kept lawns and blooming flower beds. Inside, the furniture was worn but comfortable, the walls adorned with framed photos, snapshots of birthdays, holidays, simple moments captured and frozen in time. The living room was our gathering place, especially in the evenings. After dinner, we would often settle there, my mother and father on the old, floral couch, and I curled up in the armchair by the window, lost in a book or just content to listen to their quiet conversations. It was a simple life, yes, but it was rich in ways that I only truly appreciate now, looking back through the haze of years and heartache. Everything in my memory from those early years was perfect. Or at least, that's the idyllic image I've carefully preserved, tucked away in the safest corners of my mind. Then when I was just 15, the world I knew, the world of honeysuckle and gentle smiles and quiet evenings, shattered. It was a Tuesday, I remember vividly. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, an ironic backdrop to the storm that was about to engulf our lives. Mother hadn't been feeling well for a few weeks, a persistent cough, a weariness that she brushed off as just the change of seasons. But that Tuesday she collapsed. It was sudden, violent, terrifying in its unexpectedness. Chaos erupted. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, then closer still, until they were screaming right outside our door. Paramedics rushed into our home, their movements frantic, their voices urgent and hushed. I stood frozen, a spectator in my own life, watching as they worked on my mother, their faces grim, their efforts desperate. My father stood beside me, his usual stoicism cracking, his eyes wide with a dawning horror that mirrored my own. The hospital room was cold, sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth of our kitchen. The doctors spoke in hushed tones, using words that were too big, too clinical for the simple reality that was unfolding. Aggressive, unforeseen complications. The phrases blurred together, meaningless and devastating all at once. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity, filled with anxious pacing, whispered prayers, and a growing sense of dread that settled like a stone in my stomach. Then came the words that ripped my world apart. We did everything we could. I'm so sorry. My mother was gone. Just like that. Snuffed out like a candle in a sudden gust of wind. The world tilted on its axis, the colors seemed to drain away, leaving everything washed in shades of gray. The feeling of emptiness was immediate, visceral. It clawed at my insides, leaving a hollow ache that no amount of tears could fill. The house, once filled with laughter, became a tomb. Every room echoed with her absence. Every corner whispered her name. I watched as my father, the strong, silent oak, began to wither. His shoulders slumped, his eyes lost their light, and the few words he did speak were laced with a profound loneliness that mirrored my own. We continued to live in the house because where else would we go? But we were no longer a family. We were just two people, adrift in a sea of grief, tethered to each other by blood and shared loss, yet somehow miles apart in our sorrow. Every morning I went through the motions. Wake up, get dressed, go to school. Every evening I returned to the silent house. It was still the same kitchen, the same worn furniture, the same simple meals my father painstakingly prepared, but the heart of it was gone. My mother was no longer there. Every meal was a painful reminder, just two places set at the table, two figures sitting in strained silence, the distance between us stretching far beyond the physical space of the small dining room. The laughter, the warmth, the love. It was all just a memory, a ghost that haunted the quiet rooms of our home. 3 years crawled by, each day a monotonous echo of the last. I turned 18, a milestone that should have been celebrated, but felt hollow, meaningless without my mother to share it with. I was lost, adrift in a sea of grief and teenage angst. My relationship with my father strained, fragile, built on unspoken sorrow and a mutual inability to reach out. Then another earthquake. My father remarried. It came like a bolt from the blue, shattering the fragile equilibrium we had somehow managed to establish. Even though deep down a part of me knew he deserved to be happy again, the news hit me with the force of a physical blow. Happiness? In our house. It felt like a betrayal, a desecration of my mother's memory. Her name was Sarah, my stepmother. She was nice, gentle, kind, just as my father had described. Too nice, perhaps. Too gentle. Too different from my mother. She brought with her a son, Lucian, who was a year younger than me. Lucian. The name rolled around in my head, unfamiliar, foreign, just like Sarah herself. Suddenly, our quiet, grief-stricken existence was disrupted, invaded by strangers, by new faces, new lives, new energy that felt jarring, unwelcome. First, it was just strange, unsettling, like walking into your own house and finding it rearranged, unfamiliar, yet still fundamentally the same. My life felt appended, turned inside out. Nothing was as it had been, nothing felt right. The peace, the fragile semblance of normalcy I had clung to, was gone, replaced by an awkward tension, an unspoken unease that hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lucian was quiet, just like his new stepfather, my father. He was slender, with dark, brooding eyes and a mop of unruly black hair that perpetually fell across his forehead. He moved with a quiet grace, almost like he was trying to make himself as unobtrusive as possible, to take up as little space as he could in our already crowded lives. Perhaps he was as uncomfortable, as lost as I was. Perhaps he too was learning to adapt to this strange new reality, this forced family that neither of us had asked for or wanted. Evenings became a new kind of torture. The whole family would gather in the living room, a forced attempt at togetherness. My father and Sarah would sit on the couch, their voices low, murmuring about work, future plans, things that seemed so distant, so irrelevant to my present, grief-laden reality. Lucian and I would sit on opposite ends of the room, separate islands in a sea of awkwardness. We would glance at each other occasionally, fleeting, hesitant eye contact, a shared look of confusion, discomfort. I wasn't sure, but it always made me immediately lower my head, turning my gaze to the floor, to the rug, to anything but him. Family meals were the same, a forced ritual of politeness, of strained smiles and stilted conversation. Gradually, agonizingly slowly, they did become an occasion for us to get to know each other better. Or at least that was the intention. Sarah tried, bless her heart. She was genuinely trying to bridge the chasm between us, to create a semblance of family. But the chasm was deep, rooted in grief and resentment, and politeness could only stretch so far. But then there were small things, subtle gestures that were unexpected, and frankly unsettling. Lucian started picking up food for me at the table, reaching across the table, his hand brushing mine as he placed a plate of bread, or a bowl of salad, closer to me. Small, seemingly innocent gestures. Yet they felt unusual, uncomfortable, too intimate. For a stepbrother. He was always quiet, yes, didn't talk much, but his glances, they started to linger. Longer than necessary. More intense. When I looked up, I would often find him looking at me, his dark eyes fixed on mine. And then he would quickly look away, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. Was I being too sensitive? Imagining things? Was it just a younger brother's tentative, awkward feelings for his new older sister? Trying to connect, to find a place in this strange new family dynamic? But it was undeniable. As time passed, there was an underlying tension between us. A current that hummed beneath the surface of polite smiles and forced conversations. Something unspoken, something charged. Feelings that should have been just sisterly. But when did they become more difficult to distinguish? There were moments during the day, fleeting, unexpected moments, when I would suddenly feel my heart beat faster. A strange flutter in my chest, whenever Lucian was near. If he brushed past me in the hallway, or if I caught his eye across the room. And I hated that feeling. Despised it. Hated that I had begun to think of him as more than just a brother. One night, late when the house was quiet, shrouded in darkness, I heard light footsteps in the hallway. Hesitant, almost apologetic footsteps. My door creaked open just a sliver, and then Lucian's silhouette appeared in the dim light spilling from the hallway. "Ophelia," he whispered, his voice barely audible. It had become a nightly ritual. Lucian sneaking into my room, a brief, whispered conversation before he retreated back to his own room. A childish attempt to connect, to bridge the gap between us, perhaps. But tonight felt different. He slipped into my room, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't sit on the edge of my bed, as he usually did. Instead, he stood there just inside the door, his body tense, his posture rigid. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, laden with unspoken words, unacknowledged emotions. He finally moved, slowly, deliberately, and sat down on the floor beside my bed, his knees drawn up to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. He didn't look at me. He stared down at the floor, his gaze fixed on some invisible point. "Ophelia," he said again, his voice still barely a whisper, but this time there was a different quality to it. A tremor, a vulnerability that I hadn't heard before. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. And in that moment, the air in the room seemed to thicken, to become almost palpable. His eyes were dark, intense, looking at me with a depth, a yearning that made my breath catch in my throat. It was as if he wanted to say something. Something important. Something forbidden. I didn't know how to react. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, of conflicting emotions. Fear, curiosity, a strange, unsettling excitement that prickled beneath my skin. The atmosphere between us had become strangely stifling, charged with an unspoken tension that hummed in the silence. The silence dragged on, heavy, pregnant with possibility. I felt confused, disoriented, teetering on the edge of something unknown, something dangerous. And before I could think further, before reason could intervene, I nodded. Slightly, almost imperceptibly, inviting him to stay. A little longer. We sat there in the darkness, in the dim light filtering through the window, two strangers who were suddenly, inexplicably, close. Close in a way that no one could explain. Close in a way that felt both terrifying and intoxicating. To be honest, I liked Lucian. Quite a bit. My brother. In name at least. He was very handsome, in a way that I couldn't help but notice. Even try as I might to push those thoughts aside, to categorize him as brother, family, those logical compartments in my mind felt increasingly flimsy, inadequate to contain the burgeoning feelings that threatened to spill over. Sometimes, in weak moments, I wondered if I should feel guilty about it. Lucian was my stepbrother, after all. This was wrong. Forbidden. A dangerous path to tread. But those thoughts were often fleeting, quickly ignored, rationalized away by more convenient explanations. Like the closeness of living in the same house, the forced intimacy of our shared grief, our shared new family, or the simple, undeniable harmony of two young people living in a closed space. Two young people, both lost, both searching for connection, for understanding, for something. We slept in separate rooms, yes, but they were close by, just down the hall from each other, both on the second floor, while my father and stepmother slept soundly, obliviously on the first floor. This proximity, this unspoken understanding of our shared isolation, sometimes created awkward situations. Or perhaps not awkward. Perhaps opportunities. Lucian and I were both at a crucial stage in our lives. I was a freshman in college, navigating the unfamiliar terrain of higher education, trying to find my place in a world that felt increasingly alien. He was a senior in high school, burdened with the pressure of college applications, final exams, the looming uncertainty of the future. We were both trying to get used to the new rhythm of life, the constant undercurrent of grief, the forced facade of family normalcy. And the tension between us, it was undeniable, palpable, a silent hum that vibrated in the air whenever we were in the same room. There were evenings after school, when we would find ourselves alone in the living room, Sarah and my father out for dinner, or visiting friends. We would sit on opposite ends of the sofa, the TV flickering softly, casting shifting shadows across our faces. Both of us silent, not knowing what to say, or perhaps knowing exactly what we wanted to say, but terrified to break the silence, to voice the unspoken desires that thrummed beneath the surface. The feelings between Lucian and I were ambiguous. Not exactly the feelings of normal siblings. Not brotherly, not sisterly. Something else. Something more. And I realized with a jolt that sent a shiver down my spine that I liked him. For real. Beyond the limits of family love. Beyond the boundaries of propriety. Beyond everything that was right and proper and safe. The feeling confused me, terrified me, but I couldn't deny it. Couldn't suppress the tremor that ran through me every time I saw Lucian. The involuntary quickening of my pulse when our eyes met. The heat that flushed my cheeks when he was near. The times we accidentally met on the stairs, our bodies brushing, a fleeting electric contact that sent sparks shooting through me. Our eyes met, held for a breathless moment, and there was something in his gaze. Something intense, questioning, yearning that I couldn't ignore. Something that mirrored the forbidden desires that were beginning to bloom in my own heart. It was a peaceful evening like any other. The Maryland air was still, heavy with the scent of summer blooms. Fireflies winked in the twilight, tiny beacons of light in the gathering darkness. But perhaps I knew deep down that this evening wouldn't end the same way. That something was about to shift, to change, to irrevocably alter the course of our whatever we were. My parents had gone on a trip. A weekend getaway, a belated anniversary celebration, or so Sarah had explained. 5 days. 5 days leaving Lucian and I alone at home. First, we simply thought it would be a time to relax. Away from the constant, albeit well-meaning, supervision of adults. A chance to breathe, to stretch out in the silence, to just be. That night, the first night alone in the house, we found ourselves together in the living room. Almost inevitably. Like moths drawn to a flame. We turned on the TV, flipping through channels, settling on a romantic movie. A predictable, saccharine Hollywood romance. It was a movie that neither of us were particularly interested in. Just something to kill time. Something to fill the silence. Something to distract from the unspoken tension that crackled between us. I prepared some snacks. Dried squid, a guilty pleasure of mine. Some fruit, sliced and arranged on a plate. And a few cans of beer. A little relaxation after a busy week, I told myself. A harmless way to unwind. Though deep down I knew it was more than that. It was a test. A deliberate blurring of the lines. The movie started off predictably enough. We were sitting around chatting like we always did. Small talk. Inane observations about the movie. Light laughter, carefully curated. Filling the quiet of the house. But then the movie came to an unexpected scene. Unexpected, at least in its intensity. A scene of a couple, passionately embracing each other. A long, lingering kiss, full of longing, full of desire. Full of everything that was bubbling just beneath the surface between Lucian and I. And suddenly we both fell silent. The laughter died away, choked in our throats. The carefree conversation abruptly ceased. The space between Lucian and I suddenly became stuffy, clammy. No longer the comfortable platonic comfort of two siblings, sharing a simple moment. I could feel Lucian's eyes on me. No longer the usual hesitant sideways glances. His gaze was direct, intense, burning into me with an unnerving heat. A hot feeling began to spread through my body, starting in my stomach, then radiating outwards, warming my skin, making my palms sweat. My breath hitched in my throat, but I said nothing. Just sat there frozen, holding the cold beer can in my hand as a way to keep calm, as a way to ground myself. But before I could understand what was happening, before I could even fully process the scene on the TV screen, Lucian had embraced me. His movements were strong, unexpected, and irresistible. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close, his body pressing against mine. His touch sent shockwaves through me, a jolt of electricity that made my senses reel. His kisses were urgent, desperate, as if all the emotions that had been suppressed for so long, all the unspoken desires, all the forbidden longings suddenly exploded. His lips on mine, demanding, insistent, stealing my breath, stealing my senses, stealing my reason. I couldn't resist. My mind screamed, "No, stop, this is wrong. He's your brother." But my body reacted in a different way. My heart was in turmoil, yes, but my body arched into his touch, welcomed his embrace, responded to his kisses with a hunger that mirrored his own. We had crossed the line, the invisible, unspoken, yet fiercely guarded boundary of sisterly affection, shattered, broken, irreparably, right at that moment, in the darkness, in the quiet room. That night was no longer a normal night. It marked a major turning point, a change that I knew instinctively would never be the same again, a change that would irrevocably alter the course of our lives, a change that I wasn't entirely sure I regretted. That night, all boundaries were broken, all inhibitions shattered, all pretense of sisterly affection vanished. I couldn't deny it. I had let my emotions take over, let what shouldn't have happened happen. That whole night, Lucian and I were together, completely, unreservedly, crossing all boundaries, both physical and emotional, that we had painstakingly constructed and desperately tried to maintain for so long. We didn't say much. Words felt inadequate, meaningless. Everything seemed to happen instinctively, according to some primal, unspoken script that had been written in our souls long before we even met. According to what had been suppressed for so long, the dam finally breaking, the floodgates finally opening, unleashing a torrent of emotions that overwhelmed us both. The closeness that we had tried to maintain, the forced separation, the polite distance, it was gone, replaced by emotions that we couldn't control, emotions that we didn't want to control. I remember very clearly the feeling of the next morning, the gentle sunlight filtering through the curtains, painting soft stripes across the floor, the quiet hum of the house still asleep, unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred within its walls. I lay there next to Lucian, tangled in the sheets, in the room that was supposed to be my own peaceful place to sleep. Everything around me was the same as every other day. The room was quiet. The light was warm. But inside me, something had completely changed. Something fundamental. Something irrevocable. We didn't say much. Just silently looked at each other. For a long moment. His dark eyes searching mine, questioning, vulnerable, and something else. Something that mirrored the turmoil, the confusion, the awakening in my own heart. And perhaps we both understood, in that silent, unspoken exchange, that from this moment on our lives would no longer be the same. The following days, my father and stepmother were still traveling far away, blissfully oblivious. And we continued to make the most of that time. There was no longer any feeling of awkwardness, or unease, or forced politeness, but instead a contradictory comfort, a sense of rightness in the wrongness of it all. We lived as if we were two people in love, free from the prying eyes of others, free to explore this new forbidden territory. Meals were no longer family meals, but private moments, just me and Lucian. Every night we sat together, watched movies, talked, and finally inevitably ended the night in the same bed, our separate rooms forgotten, our forced separation abandoned. During those days, those stolen moments, those whispered secrets, I let myself forget reality, forgot that Lucian and I were only step-siblings, forgot the implications, the potential consequences, the inherent wrongness of it all. We lived during that time as if we were a young free couple, without any worries, without any responsibilities, without any guilt. Everything happened so naturally, so easily, that I couldn't stop, couldn't escape. The feeling of being swept away by our secret love, by our long nights together, by the intoxicating thrill of the forbidden. Then the day came when my parents returned, when their car pulled into the driveway, when the front door opened and they walked back into the house, smiling, chatting about their travels, their faces tanned and relaxed. And just like that, everything returned to normal, or at least the pretense of normal. Lucian and I resumed our roles. Two step-siblings. Under one roof, we acted as if nothing had happened, as if every intimate moment, every stolen kiss, every shared night had been a fleeting dream, a figment of our imagination, a temporary lapse in judgment. My parents didn't notice a thing. They kept smiling, chatting, recounting anecdotes from their travels, completely unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred in their absence. While Lucian and I just sat there silently, sharing glances, knowing glances, guilty glances, knowing that our secret would have to be kept forever. In the months that followed, we continued to see each other, continuing our secret relationship. In secret, the sneaky times, the hushed whispers in the dark, the stolen kisses in empty rooms, the long sleepless nights began to happen like a habit. Whenever my parents went to bed early, or had to go out for the evening, Lucian would sneak into my room, and we would cling to each other, desperately, as if there had never been a barrier between us, as if we could somehow erase the guilt, the shame, the inherent wrongness of it all with the intensity of our physical connection. During the day we tried to act normal. Family meals continued as usual. Polite conversations, forced smiles, strained silences. My parents didn't suspect anything, or if they did, they chose to ignore it. And Lucian and I only made eye contact. Brief, fleeting, yet intensely charged eye contact. A silent language spoken only between us. This hidden tension, this constant performance of normalcy, made me feel short of breath, suffocated, but at the same time, I couldn't stop, couldn't break free from the addictive pull of our secret love. The guilt was slowly eating away at me. Yes, but it wasn't strong enough to make me give up. Not yet. I continued to live in secrecy. Every night, every moment with Lucian became so familiar, so ingrained in the fabric of my life, that I feared I wouldn't be able to escape, even if I wanted to. And deep down, did I really want to? I knew I couldn't let this go on forever, that this secret, this dangerous game had to end eventually. So, I started taking birth control pills. Quietly, carefully, without anyone knowing. A desperate, misguided attempt to control the situation, to mitigate the potential consequences of our reckless actions. I feared the repercussions of this relationship, yes. But instead of stopping, instead of ending it, I chose to control it, to manage the risk, to pretend that I could somehow navigate this treacherous path without getting completely destroyed. I tried to convince myself that everything was still within reach, that we would never be discovered, that our secret would remain safe, buried beneath layers of lies and deception. A year later, Lucian graduated and went to college. He had to leave home, move to another city, to continue his education. When Lucian left, I knew that our relationship would change, even though I didn't want to admit it, to myself or to him. The distance between us made things harder. No more sneaky nights. No more quiet moments together. No more stolen kisses in empty rooms. The distance forced us to put that relationship on hold, or perhaps to end it, officially, though I still felt heavy with nostalgia for the past, for those stolen moments, for the intoxicating thrill of the forbidden. After graduating myself, a year later, I decided to find a new path for myself, a new beginning, a clean slate. I applied for a job as an office worker for a digital company. The job wasn't anything special. Menial tasks, long hours, mediocre pay. But it gave me stability, a routine, something solid to cling to, away from the emotional turmoil, the constant conflict, the suffocating weight of my secret past. That's when I met him, the man who changed my life forever. His name is Daniel. He is the owner of a fairly large hair salon in the city. Successful, confident, and charming. From the first meeting I was impressed. By his strength, yes, but also by his gentleness. He was unlike anyone I had ever met before. So grounded, so sure of himself. Every story he told, every look he gave me made me feel safe. Something I had never truly felt. Not in all these years. Not since my mother died. We fell in love quickly, easily, naturally, as if we were destined to find each other. Two halves of a whole. Two souls that recognized each other across a crowded room. Not long after we met, we got married, starting to build the family life I had always dreamed of. The kind of family life I remembered from my childhood. The kind of love, the kind of warmth, the kind of peace. Now we have a child together. A beautiful little girl named Lily. And life is more complete than ever. The days with Daniel and Lily make me temporarily forget the painful memories of the past. The grief, the guilt, the shame. Although sometimes they still come back to haunt me. In moments of weakness. In the quiet hours of the night. When the world is still and my defenses are down. I knew I had found a new home. A man worthy of love and respect. A future finally that felt safe. Stable. Real. But, somewhere in my mind, the memory of Lucian. And those secret days. Those stolen moments. Those forbidden kisses had not completely disappeared. I wondered if I would ever truly forget it all. If that part of my past would forever be a shadow lurking in the corners of my heart. But now, I had a family to protect. And that was what mattered most. Lily's bright smile. Daniel's unwavering love. That was my reality now. That was my present. That was my future. And yet, a deep part of me still felt guilty. Towards my husband, Daniel. He was a wonderful man. Always showing me genuine care and love. Unconditional love. Love that I knew I didn't fully deserve. But every time I looked into his eyes, I felt a weight on my heart. A heavy, suffocating weight. As if I was hiding a part of my past that he should have known. A part of myself that I had kept locked away. Buried deep beneath layers of secrets and lies. I don't know if I should tell him. About my past with Lucian. Sometimes the thought keeps me up at night. Torn between telling him everything. Unburdening myself of this secret. And keeping silent. Letting the past sink deep into my memory. Hoping that it will never come back to hurt the people I love. I'm afraid that if I confess, he'll never look at me the same way again. That everything we've built, this beautiful fragile thing we've created, this little family I cherish more than anything in the world, could crumble, shatter, because of a confession, because of a past mistake, because of me. But on the other hand, continuing to live with this secret is like a rock weighing down on me every day. It makes me feel undeserving of his love, undeserving of this happiness, undeserving of this life. Honestly, I don't know what to do. I'm at a crossroads, not sure which path is right, which path will lead to the least amount of pain, the least amount of destruction. Perhaps when you hear my story you will criticize me, judge me, for hurting many people, for making wrong decisions in the past. And perhaps you would be right. But I can only ask you, if you were in my situation, what would you do? Would you choose to confess the truth, knowing that it might break everything? Or would you choose to keep silent, letting the past sink deep into your memory, hoping that it will never come back to hurt the people you love? I hope to receive your advice in the comments section below. If you were in my situation, what would you do? Should I confess everything and face the consequences? Or keep this secret to myself? To protect what I have? I appreciate any advice, sympathy, or even criticism. Because really, I'm at a crossroads, not knowing which path is right, lost in the whispers of the treelines, haunted by the ghosts of my past, and desperately seeking a way forward. And so I stand here at this precipice, the weight of my past pressing down on me, the uncertainty of my future stretching out before me. The question hangs heavy in the air, unanswered, unresolved. What should I do? Confess and risk everything, or remain silent and live with the gnawing guilt? The decision is mine and mine alone, but the fear of choosing wrongly, of causing irreparable damage, paralyzes me. Perhaps in sharing my story some clarity will emerge, some guidance will appear. Perhaps someone out there has walked a similar path and can offer a flicker of light in this overwhelming darkness. This is where my story pauses, teetering on the brink of the unknown. What happens next? Does Ophelia confess her secret, or does she choose to bury it deeper? The answer, my friends, remains to be seen. If you found yourself captivated by Ophelia's tale, if you're as torn as she is about the path forward, let me know in the comments below. What advice would you give Ophelia? Should she confess or stay silent? And most importantly, would you want to hear what happens next? Your thoughts and engagement will decide if Opilia's story continues. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments. Let's explore this crossroads together and see where Opilia's journey takes her. Perhaps with your guidance, she can find her way out of the shadows and into the light. Thank you for listening.